Good morning, Flosstube. This is probably one of the rare times you will hear me say good morning. It is 9:32 a.m., Friday, August 5th, 2016, coming to you from my lovely apartment in Sunderland, Massachusetts. I just thought I would stop by with a quick little video just to share some birthday cards and things that I just opened with you, and then show you my latest delving into mad scientist mode with my cross stitch. But I will explain all that in a moment. Like I said, today is my birthday, so I took the day off from work because I had a half day anyway, and I just did comp time so that I didn't have to use any of my actual time off hours. And it's been a nice morning so far, very quiet. Bill didn't have to go into work quite as early because technically he's supposed to have a day off, but you know, with camp starting Sunday and all, some of the coaches will probably be in, so his day off might not quite be as much of a day off as it should be. But anyway, so I got up and had breakfast with him, and I got a very hilarious yet slightly interesting video message from my sister on my Facebook page to sing happy birthday to me. And I guess it was one of those smartphone apps that transforms you into something else, because she had these big bee eyes with black and yellow stripes on her face and antenna, and she was singing in a bee voice. But I have to say, as funny as it was really touching, because nobody's sung happy birthday to me since I moved away from home, because my husband doesn't sing. He says he leaves that to the professionals, meaning me, but I sing. I just don't know whether or not I should. But so that was cute and funny and slightly strange to see your sister with big bug eyes and a really squeaky voice. But it was funny. Love you, sis. That was great. It was a great start to the morning. And then I was just playing around with some experimentation on some fabric dyeing, which I'll show you here in a minute. Kind of one of my stranger tangents that I went on, but it's actually working out. So then the mailman came and he brought me my birthday cards, and I got some money from my parents and my in-laws, which is nice. I think what I'm going to put it toward is I want to upgrade to a 300mm lens. Right now I have an older, I think it's from 2008. It's the lens that came with the camera that I bought from my friend, so I think she got her camera in 2008, if I remember correctly. It's a 250mm, which is good. It's a good medium range telephoto lens, but I am thinking of trading up to a new 300mm just to get that extra focal length for football games, because I have a freaking huge 500mm lens super telephoto that I use at home games when we're in Amherst at our stadium. But when we go to Gillette, unless you have a media pass, you cannot bring a lens that big into the stadium. And a 300mm lens would be very good for getting, especially from where I shoot from now, because the coaches' wives watch from one of the press box kind of, not press box, but the, what do you call it, like the luxury suite, which is awesome because, yeah, I'm a nobody. I would never have the opportunity to see the Patriots play. I couldn't even afford like the triple nosebleed section up at the top of Gillette. That's the third tier on the very top row, because those tickets are like $150 a seat if it's a non, if it's just a regular game and it's not a conference game. Plus, I could never sit up there because I'm terrified of heights, and you're like looking straight down, because the way Gillette's shaped, it's like a bowl, and up on the very top rows, it's like you're looking straight down into the stadium. So even if I could get to a Patriots game, the only seats I could afford, I could never sit in, and I would certainly never be in one of the luxury boxes because I'm a nobody who doesn't know anyone. So it's really nice to be able to sit up there. But my 250mm lens just doesn't really, it doesn't quite have the focal length I need. So I'm thinking of trading in my old lens. I know I can trade it in at my local camera shop. And I do want to get a neutral density filter to help me with lighting, because I'm still not as good as I can be at taking outdoor photography. Sometimes, just depending on the time of day and the direction of sunlight at the stadium, it's hard for me to get good pictures, even though I know how I should be adjusting my camera. So a neutral density filter would help with that. And my husband, I talk to him sometimes because videography can be similar to photography in certain aspects, like f-stops, lens apertures, that kind of thing. And he told me that the nice thing about his cameras is that they have a built-in neutral density filter. So he always stresses to his kids, hit this button, turn the filter on, because it'll keep it from being washed out with too much light, too much exposure. And I think even his cameras adjust it according to the light that it senses in the lens. Now, for me, I just have to set the settings and put the neutral density filter actually over the lens. But I found one that is like adding 2 stops, which would mean like adding 2 f-stops, which would be, let me think this through, because it's an inverse proportion. The larger the f-stop, the smaller the aperture of the lens and the less light gets in. So it's like you're adding 2 f-stops so you can get less light into the lens. So I think that in a nutshell, although I'm rambling now, in a nutshell, I'm going to use my birthday money to upgrade to a new lens and get a neutral density filter. And then I have to share this. This is really, really cool. My sister, I guess, was at an estate auction and found this for me. Now, one other thing, I know the question comes along on Flosstube a lot, what are your other hobbies besides cross-stitch? Well, I collect and use fountain pens. And that'll come up here in a minute with the actual, when I actually get to cross-stitching stuff. But she knows this. I don't have a lot of vintage pens. I do have a few that I use. But for the most part, my collection is pretty modern. So when there's a really pretty vintage pen out there that's, a nice little find. Well, my sister went to an estate auction, I guess, in Richmond, and she found this for me. Now, the way she sent it, it had a handwritten tag from whoever's estate it was from, and it says, "Present from camp before we were married." And it is a fountain pen, and this here is a little pocket pencil. Now, it's got the name Billy engraved on it, which is cute, because Bill is my husband's name, so it looks like, honestly, it was lacquered to look like a Japanese seam. I'd be thrilled to know how old this thing is. It's solid metal. It is a Schaefer, and Schaefers are still in existence today. This is going to be another rambling tangent, so if y'all don't want to listen, just please shut this video off and wait till my next one when it's actually going to be all cross-stitched. But I actually had a vintage Schaefer Targa from 1989. That was the fountain pen that my grandmother gave me the year I turned 15. She had given me a service merchandise catalog and just said, okay, well, circle a few things in here you like, and then I'll have some idea of what to shop for. And they had a Schaefer Targa in there, and she gave it to me. And that started my love of fountain pens. And I carried that thing with me religiously through high school. I was probably like the world's biggest dork anyway. But then, you add a fountain pen to the mix, and there you go. Hang on, I just dropped my thing here. So, you add that to the mix, and I probably just should have tattooed dork across my forehead and just called it a day. But I carried that pen with me through high school and into college. And sadly, I think somewhere along the line between college and getting married and moving to Memphis, it got lost. So for a long time, I didn't even use fountain pens because I was just so upset that I lost that one. But then I got back to it, and over the years, I've collected pens. And I do actually have a Schaefer Targa in my collection that I won in an auction last year at the Washington, D.C. Super Pen Show. So I do have one that's very similar to the one she gave me, but the one she gave me that started this whole schlemiel off, who knows where it ended up. And it wasn't a cheap pen then either. I mean, Schaefer Targas were not expensive, but they weren't cheap. I mean, they're far cheaper fountain pens to introduce yourself to the hobby with now than that one was. But so over the years, you know, I've collected them. And this pen, it's really, really cool. It's a Schaefer, and it looks like it has like a flex nib to it, which means, you know, like you get that nice calligraphy where you have the thin strokes of the ink mixed with the thick strokes. And like most pens of a certain age, this one is a lever filler, which I don't know if you can see it, but there's this little piece of metal that pulls out. And what it is there's a sack in here. And this pen should work fine as long as the sack is intact. But there's like a little latex sack in here. And what you do is when you pull the lever down, it compresses the sack, and then you put it in a bottle of ink and let the lever go. And then that expands the sack, and as the sack expands, it just sucks ink up into it like a straw. And lever fillers were pretty much the most common, except for eyedropping pens, which would mean you would take this section out and actually fill the barrel of the pen with ink. Other than eyedroppers, lever fillers were quite common back in around the turn of the century, even I think in the 20s and 30s especially. So this pen has to be very old to be a solid metal pen. First of all, most pens today are composites, although there are solid metal pens. But and this had to be like a lady's pen, because it had to be, because see how it's got the loop here where the little tag was tied through it. It was like you could wear it on a chatelaine around your neck. And a lot of secretaries did that at the time. And the same thing with the little pencil. I mean, they were meant to be worn, you know, secretaries who needed their pens with them all the time. They would just wear them on a chain around their neck, and then you didn't have to go fumbling for a pen. I haven't tried it yet because I just got it a few minutes ago, but as long as the ink sac is intact, it should work fine. And you can tell it's a lady's pen because it's obviously a purse pen size. Even today, when you buy pens, there are certain models that have a lady's pen that is usually much thinner and a little bit shorter than a man's pen. I tend to use bigger pens, and it's funny because I have such small hands. My mantra is, well, I don't like big pens, and I said that to one of my friends who runs a fountain pen store in Wisconsin at the Long Island Pen Show this past spring, and he looked at me and said, "You've got a Visconti Opera Master. That is a massive pen. What do you mean you use small pens?" And I was like, well, I only have one. Now I only have one because it would be cost prohibitive to have more than one, even with the discount that he was able to give me, but still. So this is a beautiful little addition to my collection, and I'm fascinated by this little pencil too. I think you would just untwist the top, or no, you know, when you had mechanical pencils back in the day, you usually just put a piece of lead in and then twisted it in. You usually didn't take them apart like you would nowadays to refill a mechanical pencil. I can't read what it says. I know it says Schaefer, but isn't it just, it's so sweet. And it was so sweet that she thought of me because she knows that I'm into this kind of stuff. And it's really, really cool. I do have a couple of other little vintage things here. These are vintage eyedropper pens. This one is what fountain pen people call a Franken pen, where you take you like cannibalize parts from different pens and make your own pen. This one writes beautifully. This one is I have forgotten which kind this is. It's like it's a Waterman body with the wall lever sharp flex nib. So it's like two completely different pens put together into one. And it looks beaten up. And it is beaten up because it's an old pen body. You know, there's brassing, like the plating wore off of the clip and stuff like that. But it's also a lever filler. You know, and it works fine. The sack is intact. It works fine. And then this one is what is called an eyedropper pen. And this one, I've forgotten which kind this one. Oh, you know what? This one was just a random pen that I bought online, and it says Union Trust Company, Providence, Rhode Island. So I'm thinking this was like a pen that was at a bank. back in the day. And this one is an eyedropper pin, because what you do is you unscrew the section here, and then you just use a pipette or an eyedropper to fill the barrel. And when you use pins this way, you should put a little silicone grease on the threads so that it doesn't leak. But this one is a flex nib, and I love the way this one writes too. I just haven't used it in a while. So I do collect vintage pens, just not as much as my modern ones, but this little Schaefer that my sister gave me is so cute. I can't wait to ink it up and see if the sack works. The only way you can really tell is if you write with it and it's like a line of writing later, the ink's gone, then you probably got a leaky sack, which, you know, you can restore these vintage pens. I do know people who can do that, so if need be, I'll try to see. But that was just my sweet little fountain pen set. And I love vintage pens because I love the thought that this pen has a story to it. I don't know who Billy was. I don't know who used this. I don't know whether they wrote love letters during World War II with it, or, you know, that they kept a journal of their young children's lives, or what, you know. I mean, there's like a million different things you can do with the pen. And I love being a part of the continuing history of something that was created a long time before I was born. So, sis, thank you so much. This is really great. I'm going to try it out later and see if it writes. And if not, I know some people who can fix it for me. And that was really very thoughtful, and you didn't have to do that. I'm sure it was not cheap, because vintage fountain pens aren't. So thank you very much, sis. I appreciate it and love you. So now, of course, Flosstube, I'm finally getting to the point of cross stitch, although I'm still keeping it with fountain pens just a little bit. A couple of weeks ago, I bought, I believe it was the Just Cross Stitch magazine that had just, the new issue that had just come out. And in it, it talked about non-conventional ways of dyeing fabric, and one of their ways was to use watercolor paints, and another was to use food coloring to do like little tie-dye things with. And I was going to get some food coloring and try that, because I thought, well, you know, that's kind of different. It would be interesting to see. And then I thought, wait a minute. I have a metric ton of bottled fountain pen ink. Wouldn't that be a similar thing? I mean, because what is ink? It's pigment suspended in water. So technically that should be the same thing, right? So, and then too, I was looking at the washcloth I use to clean my pens off with when I, you know, dip them in the ink bottles and fill them. And I've run that thing through the wash probably half a dozen times at least, and it's still got ink stains all over it, because not all the ink comes off, but it's just my cleaning cloth, so it's not a big deal. But I thought, well, and then I was thinking about all the times that I've gotten ink all over my hands, like kind of like I have now, although it's not as bad as it could be. I do have some ink left on my hands from earlier this morning, but, you know, I mean, I thought, well, you don't want to get ink on your clothes or anything, because it can stain, and it depends on the brand too as to the stainability. So I thought, well, let's give this a try. So I took the a little bit of inspiration from the food coloring tutorial, and I soaked some fabric in equal parts vinegar and cold water for about 10 minutes. Because, you know, when you dye Easter eggs, you put vinegar in the water so it sets the color so that it doesn't come off all over the place. So the vinegar was, I felt like, the really important step there. So then I rinsed the fabric off, and I laid it down. I put up on my kitchen table, I put a trash bag and a paper grocery bag and several layers of paper towels, just to make sure I wasn't getting it on anything. And I have eyedroppers, because like I showed with that first fountain pen, I do have pens I fill with eyedroppers. So I've got a couple of little eyedroppers, and I just picked out a couple of random colors of ink I thought would go well together. And I eyedroppered them on, and I have paintbrushes. So I was painting water on to kind of give it a little bit of a, you know, to get the ink to wick out into the fabric. And these are some of the things I came up with. And, you know, I'm kind of surprised at the colors that I came up with. There's a couple here I would definitely use. The first one I did, this is two separate ink brands. This one is Diamine Majestic Purple, and the pink is Iroshizuku Sutsuji, which is, I believe, translates as azalea, and it's kind of a pinkish magenta. And I think it came out kind of pretty. Now, it was splotchy because I was using the eyedropper and just kind of blooping it all over the fabric at first before I really thought about technique and possible applicators to use. But I thought, this has potential. So then after I got the ink on it, it was still, soaking wet, so I blotted it. And once it started to dry, I threw it in my dryer. Now, what I did earlier this morning, I had to clean up the dryer to make sure there was no more ink in there. So I think going forward, I'm just going to have like a little fabric bag or something to tie it up in there so that I'm not potentially ink staining the dryer and my husband's clothes. Because I think I ruined one of his shirts when I washed a Vera Bradley bag that I forgot had a little disposable fountain pen in it, and red ink went all over the Vera Bradley, and I think yeah, that's a whole other story. So yeah, this was the first piece I dyed, and it was just plain white Aida fabric, no color to it at all. So it's kind of dark. I don't know what you'd use it for, but that was my first attempt. And then my second attempt, I'm not so sure I liked as much, but I'm not so sure that the ink I used in this one, or one of the inks, was really the right ink to use. This one is a combination of Diamine Sherwood Green, which Diamine is the brand. It's a French brand of ink, and it's the one that I ended up collecting the most of. I didn't mean to set out to collect most of one brand of ink, but Diamine is very reliable. It's got a lot of really pretty shades. It's relatively easy to clean up, so I just kind of stuck with it. And I'd say of the 30 bottles of ink I have, maybe 14. Oh, excuse me, please. Of course I don't start coughing until I'm making a video. Allergies. No such thing as an allergy season for me. It's just allergy life. Excuse me. I'll try not to do that again. But this one, the blue is Jayerban Blue Nuit, which translates as blue night, of course. And it's kind of a denim blue. Now, when I put it on, I thought it was way too dark. Excuse me. Excuse me, my rotten sinuses, folks. So I thought this one was a little too dark. So what I did was, Jayerban is not known to be color fast at all. Now, it is a fountain pen ink I would recommend for a beginner who's new to bottled ink because it's very easy to clean up. Jayerban, they've been in France since 1680. And it's one of the world's probably most recognizable fountain pen inks because of that. And they don't use any chemical preservatives in their ink. Their ink is all organic, which is nice. It makes it easy to clean up, and that's why I started with that ink. But the reason I got away from it is because the bottles aren't shaped very well, except for using very small pens, and most people don't like Jayerban for the bottles. Pretty much. I mean, the colors are nice, and the cleanability is nice. But, so this one went on really dark, the blue did, and I basically immediately took it and dipped it in a bowl of cold water, which pretty much washed all the ink out of it. Not the Sherwood, well, some of the Sherwood green, but the blue pretty much completely washed out of it, which I guess if you want a nice pale blue fabric, that would be the way to do it. But I'm not sure I would use Jayerban again, just because, none of these are going to be color fast because I don't use what fountain pen aficionados call bulletproof ink, meaning it's permanent. There are some permanent inks out there. There's very few because most people don't use them for that sort of thing, but there are some that are called document inks that are supposed to be indelible for signing documents. That sort of thing. But I don't know. This color kind of left me flat. If I was going to do blue, I have prettier blues. I have one by a company called Wall Eversharp, which actually was a vintage fountain pen company that went out of business and was recently bought, and the people who bought the company were, reintroducing the vintage pens to the modern market kind of thing. And they have except I can't find this ink anywhere anymore, so I might not waste it dyeing fabric with it, but it's called Walberry, and it is a gorgeous, like, bluish purple. It's like a royal blue, but it's got some purple in it. That sort of that kind of color is probably the blue I would try next, because this one, it's denim blue to begin with, so it's not like a really crisp blue. It's kind of like a smoky blue-gray kind of color. And I don't even use it that much when I write. I won a bottle from Brian and Lisa back on their 100th podcast when they were doing giveaways for the 100th podcast. So it's not even necessarily a color I would have picked for myself. So I'm not sure I would dye anything else with the blue, but it was just an attempt. Now this one is one of my absolute favorites. And this one I kind of, after I soaked the fabric in the vinegar water solution, I rolled it up and did kind of like a little scrunched up tie-dye thing. And this one is actually 3 shades of color here, and it happens that it's 3 of my favorite inks, so that probably helps. But this I thought really turned out cool. The top part up here, this lighter orange, is an Iroshizuku ink called Yuyaki, which I think is Japanese for sunset. It's supposed to be like sunset orange. And when you write with it, it's not a really in-your-face orange. It shades nicely. It's got some different, like, it shades from a little bit more yellow to darker orange, but it's not like, woo, right there, searing your eyeballs like you're looking right into the sun. So I really like this top part here. And then the middle part, the yellow, there aren't a lot of yellow inks anyway, and a lot of people don't use yellow ink because if you're writing with it, it's hard to see. But this one, actually, when you write with it, it's really cool. It's from a French brand called Théâtre Mentis, and the name of it is Mahatma Gandhi. And it's like a very, when you write with it, and I write with broad nib pens, so that tends to bring out colors and shadings in ink more than if you use a really fine pen. But it's one that is a very bright yellow, but when it dries it kind of turns into like an orangey yellow. So it kind of sort of did that same effect when it dried on the fabric. And I used my last little sample of it, and I'd been meaning to buy a bottle anyway, so I placed an order for like 5 bottles of ink that I had been meaning to, that if I hadn't gotten into this fabric dyeing with ink thing, I still would have bought them, because I love the Mahatma Gandhi ink. It is really, really cool to write with, and it turned out really pretty. It kind of mixed in with the orange a little bit, and it just kind of has this little yellow. And then down here on the bottom, this darker orange is by a guy from Boston named Nathan Tardif, and he created Noodler's ink. And it's a very super saturated ink, and by that I mean there's a lot of pigment in it, so it's got a lot of color. And the cayenne, he makes several different shades of orange. He's got one called Habanero, one called Apache Sunset, which is like supposed to be really, really bright. And then I think his Dragon's Napalm, I can't remember right off the top of my head if that's a red or an orange, but this is one of the less intense oranges that he makes. And it's really, really cool. I really like the color combination in this one, and I would dye a bigger piece of fabric and use this. I totally would. I mean, I was wearing the orange and the yellow for a couple of days because, but the cool thing about this one, and the camera won't pick it up, I'm sure, but up here on the top where I had the Yuyaki, yeah, I just left this one to sit on the paper towel to dry a little bit before I threw it in the dryer. And when I went back to it, I looked at it, and some of the color had wicked into the paper towel, and it had little splotches of like a pinkish orange up top. And it was so freaking funny. My father would be so ashamed of me. I was like, oh yeah, it's like that science thing that we all did in middle school where you took the paper and you dipped it in the water and it had like ink on it and you watched the ink colors change as it saturated with water. What's that called? And of course, Google to the rescue. I went to the internet and I literally typed in, what do you call it when you put ink on paper and stick it in water? And it's paper chromatography, and I remembered it after the fact. But it was kind of like a chromatography effect because it was where the ink was wicking up into the paper towel, and you could see these little pink patches. And so there's an underlying, like, because of course red and yellow make orange, so whatever red they use to combine with the yellow to make the Iroshizuku Yuyaki must have pink in it. So I thought that was really kind of cool, like science experiment thing. Once I remembered it was called paper chromatography. Had a brain bubble because I remember doing it in middle school science class, and it's cool to watch something separate out into all its component colors. Now this is one I did this morning, and this one was kind of a mistake. I wanted to use my Ackerman Chinatown Red. Ackerman ink is really, it's really nice ink. It's kind of hard to come by in the States because it's only sold at Anderson Pens and Van Ness Pens, which is out in Arkansas. It comes from the Netherlands, and they sell it at a shop in The Hague. And there's a lot of really pretty shades of ink. If it weren't so expensive, I would probably own more than the one bottle I've got. But it's a very true red. And by that, I mean it's not like a pinkish red. It's not, it's just like a true, it's called Chinatown Red, and it's like the kind of red you would see in Chinatown, that really bright, festive red. Kind of like a Christmas red too, I guess, which is why I initially bought the bottle of ink from the Andersons, because I wanted a true red to sign Christmas cards with. Because I had a couple of pinky reds, and it's like, that's not Christmas red. You got to sign Christmas cards with the true red. But I think because I didn't clean my eyedroppers out after I did the orange ones, I think there might have still been some ink left when I was using the Chinatown Red, because it came out like this. Now this is Chinatown Red and Diamine Hope Pink. And I just had a little sample of Hope Pink because I was testing some pink inks, because I wanted to be able to write my niece with pink ink, because she loves pink. I mean, she's like Pinky Tuscadero. She's all about the pink. And this one, I don't know if I would use the pink for writing because it's a little in your face. But for dyeing fabric, it actually kind of looked pretty cool. I would buy a bottle of Diamine just to dye fabric with. I wouldn't, of the Hope Pink. I wouldn't necessarily use it to write with. But they have smaller, the Diamine inks come in 50 milliliter bottles, but they also have the smaller 30 ones. And I would buy a bottle of the smaller Hope Pink just to use it for dyeing fabrics. But the red kind of came out a bit orangey, which surprised me, but I think I just didn't clean out my eyedroppers. So note to self, if you want true colors, you have to make sure your instruments are clean before you do it. But actually, I kind of like how that turned out, the orange and pink and the mottled effect. It's kind of, the pink is kind of like a magenta-y, like purplish pink, I guess. So that one was kind of fun, even though that's not what I intended. That outcome was kind of cool. But this one is the one that if I knew what to stitch on it, I would make myself a bigger piece. This is actually 3 different colors, and I love, 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 love it. It is Iroshizuku Kujaku, which is peacock blue, which is like a really pretty teal. It's like a bluish green. Then I used Iroshizuku Shin Ryuku, I think is the name of it, and it's like a pine needle green. Which it's one of those greens that tends towards the blue side of the spectrum. And it's a really muted, it's not like an emerald green, it's not like a Kelly green. It's just a real pretty bluish green. And then the light green specks in here are, yet again, Diamine Apple Glory. And this is exactly like the color you would see on a Granny Smith apple. I mean, it's like really pale, kind of yellowish green. This is definitely a green that tends more towards the yellow side of the spectrum than the blue. And I absolutely love this, and I would use it. I can't think of any pattern I have that I would stitch on a fabric this dark, but if I had something, I would totally use this. The Iroshizuku ink is probably a little expensive to use to dye fabric with, but I love these color combinations. I mean, in fact, the Schaefer Targa pen that I mentioned earlier, I usually keep that inked with the Shin Ryoku because it's a gold flex nib, sort of, and it just shades really well and is a real pretty green. And the Apple Glory I don't use a whole lot, but when I'm trying to do something a little playful and different in a letter or a journal entry, I'll use the Apple Glory. So I'm really pleased with how this turned out. I mean, I don't know. I just had this eureka moment of, well, what if I try my fountain pen inks to dye my fabrics with? And I think they all turned out really fun. I mean, it's just something to play around with. Of course, they're not going to be color fast because, like I said, there's very few what we call bulletproof inks that are color fast. There's one that Nathan Tardif makes called Bay State Blue, and it is notorious because it supposedly stains your fountain pens, stains your clothes. It's probably the closest to an unintentional bulletproof ink that's out there. That one might be good to dye fabric with, but I don't know that I would ever want to put it in, unless I had just like a cheap little throwaway pen that I didn't care if it got stained, which I have a few of those, because I use some inks that have glitter in them, and I don't want to use the glitter in the good pens and clog the feeds of the pens, and then they don't write. So, but I mean, this was just kind of something fun to do, something to play around with. My husband was like, it's a good thing we don't have a dog, because I'd come home and find out you dyed the dog. But, you know, I mean, the only casualty of this was getting ink on my hands, and I get ink on my hands anyway when I'm, you know, filling my fountain pens. So I hope you don't mind my rambling on about pens and ink, but this was just kind of a way to combine my two favorite hobbies, or two of my favorite hobbies. You know, I think I'm going to start playing around with application techniques other than just using eyedroppers. I was thinking maybe makeup sponges to, like, you know, just blot areas of ink onto the fabric. Not really sure what else I could use. I've got paintbrushes, but that's not... I use the paintbrushes more to kind of get the ink that I put on the fabric to spread out. So, I don't know. I mean, it's some things to think about and experiment with. But, you know, it just hit me. Why not try it? So, it's been fun anyway. I mean, you know, might not ever create anything that I could actually stitch on, but it's fun trying anyway. So this looks like it's going to be the longest video I've made so far. So thank you, my fellow floss tubers, for putting up with this slightly off tangent video. I promise you the next two I'm going to make, I'm going to do a whip update and a haul video. But I think when I do haul videos, I'm going to keep those separate, because I don't know why somebody wouldn't want to watch a haul video unless they just don't want to be enabled any further than they already have been, which is probably why I should not watch them. But stationery, Lush bath products, cross stitch hauls, I mean, I'm a sucker for a haul video, so I will have another couple of videos. I am doing a Stitching Olympics kind of challenge that I'll discuss in my next video, and until next time, I wish you a happy life and happy stitching, and thank you for listening.